What if I told you that a tiny flaw in the US Constitution once threw a presidential election into absolute chaos? Well, in 1800, that's exactly what happened. The country was pushed right to the brink, and the solution was a critical patch to the system, the 12th Amendment. So let's unpack how one election almost broke America and how a single amendment was created to hold it all together.
To really get what happened, we have to start with a pretty dire warning from George Washington himself. In his farewell address, he basically said, hey, watch out for political parties. He was worried they'd become these potent engines for ambitious people to just grab power and tear the new nation apart.
And wow, he called it. Just 4 years after he left office, his warning became terrifyingly real. The election of 1800 didn't just feature political parties. It exposed a fatal flaw in the Constitution that those parties made 1,000 times more dangerous.
All right, so let's dig into the core problem here. A constitutional crisis that came from a scenario the founders just never saw coming. Nobody was ready for it. An unprecedented tie for the presidency.
So when the electoral votes were counted, the result was just stunning. Thomas Jefferson, who was clearly the presidential candidate for his party, got 73 votes. The problem? His own running mate, Aaron Burr, also got 73 votes. Under the original rules, they were now tied for the presidency.
This tie automatically kicked the final decision over to the House of Representatives. But instead of a quick, simple solution, the whole thing just evolved into this bitter political standoff that paralyzed the government. People were genuinely afraid of conspiracies and even civil unrest.
Just how bad was it? Get this. For a week, the House voted 35 times, and every single time it was a deadlock. There were even rumors that the military might have to step in. It took 36 separate ballots to finally break the stalemate and pick a president. I mean, the young nation was truly teetering on the edge of collapse.
So you have to be asking, how on earth could this even happen? To understand that, we need to rewind a bit and look at the founders' original and, as it turns out, deeply flawed plan for electing a president.
You see, the original system was really designed for a world without political parties. Each elector would cast 2 votes for the 2 people they thought were most qualified. The guy with the most votes became president, and the person in second place became vice president. The idea was simple: get the 2 best men for the job, no matter what their politics were.
But there was a massive blind spot in that plan. It just completely failed to predict the rise of organized political parties, which, fundamentally changed how everybody thought about elections.
We actually got a pretty clear warning sign back in the 1796 election. The system, which was supposed to pick the 2 best leaders for the country, instead gave us a Federalist president, John Adams, and a vice president from the opposing party, his biggest political rival, Thomas Jefferson. I mean, can you even imagine that happening today?
And this divide was fueled by 2 totally different visions for America. On the Federalist side, you had Alexander Hamilton, who was pretty skeptical of direct democracy. Federalists saw Jefferson as this dangerous radical who was sympathetic to the French Revolution, and they thought he would literally destroy the Republic.
And then you contrast that with Thomas Jefferson, who put all his faith in the common person and wanted a more decentralized, farm-based country. This wasn't just a simple disagreement over policy. This was a deep ideological fight for the very soul of the new nation.
So the chaos of the 1800 election was a massive wake-up call for the entire country. It was crystal clear the system was broken and it needed a permanent fix. And that crisis led directly to a really elegant constitutional solution.
And what's amazing is how fast they moved. The deadlock happens in early 1801. By 1803, Congress has proposed the 12th Amendment, and by 1804, just in time for the next presidential election, it's ratified. The system was fixed.
And the change itself, it was brilliantly simple. Before 1804, electors cast 2 identical votes for president. After the amendment, they cast 2 totally separate votes, one specifically for president and another one specifically for vice president.
It sounds like a pretty minor tweak, right? But it was profound. By creating separate ballots for the 2 jobs, it made sure that a presidential candidate and their own running mate could never, ever end up in a tie for the presidency again.
But the 12th Amendment did more than just prevent another Jefferson-Burr disaster. It also clarified and really fine-tuned the backup plan for any election where no single candidate wins a majority of the votes.
So what happens if, say, 3 or more candidates split the vote and nobody hits that magic number, which today is 270 electoral votes? Well, the Constitution has an emergency procedure for that, called a contingent election.
Okay, let's break this down. First, nobody hits the 270 mark. Then, the House of Representatives steps in to pick the president. But here's the wild part. They choose from the top 3 candidates, and each state gets only 1 vote. That means California has the exact same power as Wyoming. Meanwhile, over in the Senate, they pick the vice president from the top 2 candidates, and there, each senator gets their own vote.
And don't think this is just some dusty theoretical process that can never happen. This backup plan has actually been used. In 1825, the House elected John Quincy Adams, even though Andrew Jackson had more popular votes and electoral votes. And in 1837, the Senate had to step in to choose the vice president.
So all of this brings us right back to today, because this 200-year-old amendment is still incredibly relevant and sits right at the center of this huge, ongoing debate about how we choose our leaders.
You know, maybe the amendment's biggest legacy was that it forced the Constitution to finally accept the reality of political parties. The Supreme Court even said later that the 12th Amendment basically cemented the idea that the Electoral College had changed from being a group of wise men choosing the best person to being a machine for party line voting.
And that acceptance of party politics is exactly why this all matters so much right now. The system the 12th Amendment solidified is central to today's biggest election debates. Arguments over the Electoral College versus the popular vote, controversies about how Congress certifies votes, and the very real possibility of a contingent election in our deeply polarized country.
So here's the bottom line. The 12th Amendment was a brilliant fix for a crisis that was created by the birth of American political parties. But it leaves us with a really important final question. Can a system that was designed for the political realities of 1804 truly handle the intense challenges of the 21st century?